It is Locked On Jazz for the 15th of June. I looked at the last 103 coaching hires, all since 2010. What did we learn on what style, type of coach is the most successful in the NBA? It's next on Locked On Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, lots of geeky numbers today, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. This is a vintage Locked On show. I did this show 9 years ago in a similar style and actually heard about a front office sitting in the room listening to it as they were then going through a coaching search a year later. So welcome to any front offices that might be tuned in to this show. Thanks very much for tuning in. This is your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight and expertise, and hopefully making it better to be a Jazz fan, as I said. Thanks for making us your first listen each day, and I wanted to point out that this is kind of fun. Today, Locked On is partnering with Arcade1Up to give away 3 free NBA Jam Shack machines. Stay tuned later in the show to learn how. All right, one other programming note that I just wanted to get out right away, and then we'll dig in. Every year we do this NBA mock draft. It's the most incredible production that we do. It has over 50 insiders, all of our local experts. We mock out the whole draft. I'm actually so excited this year because with the Jazz being out of the draft, I'm not as tuned in. I listen to NBA Big Board probably every day with Leaf and Richard and Raphael and Sam. But this is going to be all first round, 5-day series. It starts tomorrow at the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. The Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. All right, let's get to it. Here's what I did. This is the essence of a lock show here. What I did is there's 103 coaching hires that I graded. There have been actually a few more, but Wes Unseld, Jamal Mosley, some of these last year hires, I'm not sure. Jason Kidd, I gave him a grade. Ime Udoka, I gave a grade. Chauncey Billups, I gave a grade. But some of the other hires that were just made feels like it's too early. So there have been 103 coaching hires. I broke them into 9 categories. There are 56 former head coaches. So about half. 33 of those are just head coaches. Like they just been a head coach. 23 of those had won a lot. Terry Stotts fits into that. Frank Vogel's won a title. He fits into that in the list of Jazz coaches that are being interviewed. Then, that break actually I think is somewhat relevant of those 23 former head coaches with lots of wins. Then you have 12, like Doc Rivers fits into that when he went to the Clippers, when he goes to the 76ers. 12 assistant coaches with no head coaching experience, but are former players. So Ime Udoka fits into that. Chris Quinn for the Jazz fits in this search, fits in for that a little bit. He's the Miami assistant out of Marquette, played in the league a little bit, has been a Miami assistant 3 years, a Northwestern assistant for years, been a Miami assistant. He has no head coaching experience, but he bounced around the league for a long time. So he fits into that mold. Then there are 11 assistants with head coaching experience who are non-players. So that's Alex Jensen. That's Kevin Young out of Phoenix. And then Charles Lee, who's with the Bucks, I actually forgot to put on our list today, out of Washington, D.C. He would not fit on this. He's never been a head coach. He was a player in Europe, but he's never been a head coach. So he fits into the next group, which is an assistant coach, no head coach, non-player. Okay? So that's the next piece of the puzzle. And then it starts to, there are 10 of those. I say there were 11 assistants, no head coach, non-player. And then there's 3 head coaches that are both assistant coaches, 3 players with head coaching experience, and former players. We don't have that on our list. Then there are 5 former players, 3 former college coaches, and 2 foreign coaches. There are some little tiers inside each of these that have some relevance. So, for example, a former assistant, non-player, but head coach. There's a difference to me between, and results here, between Nick Nurse and Taylor Jenkins and Jim Boylan. Jim Boylan was a head coach on a collegiate level, where Nick Nurse and Taylor Jenkins, and Alex Jensen in this case, were a head coach in a G League model. The little bit of that seems to matter. Quite honestly, the head coach, having head coach assistant, head coaching experience collegiately, non-player, doesn't feel like a great match in the NBA. So that's the first thing. I broke down it into the 19 categories. 33 just former head coaches. They were a head coach, they got experience. Dwayne Casey in Minnesota. Not a lot of wins. He ends up getting another job. He ends up doing well. Former head coaches with wins at that point. At this point, they're established. They've won 23 of those. 12 assistant coaches, no head coach, but a player. 11 assistant coaches with a head coach and a non-player. 10 head coaches, no player, no head coach. So that's, in our group, that's Johnnie Bryant, that's Lamar Skeeter, that's Will Hardy, that's Sean Sweeney, that's Charles Lee. Assistant coach with head coaching with player, former coach, former foreign coach, and there's also former GM. That's the hit. Greg Popovich, Steve Kerr. That one's interesting to me. And I tried to go through and wonder if there's anything to it. There's not a big enough sample size, but there is one candidate that's not been mentioned, and I don't know why, but it's an interesting one. Brent Barry of the San Antonio Spurs front office, interviewed for the Portland Trailblazer head coaching job last year, has not been mentioned at all this year, but that's a former player who's been a broadcaster and been a GM. That's Steve Kerr. Pop had been a former GM, former collegiate head coach. Danny Ainge was actually a former broadcaster, head coach, then broadcaster, and then GM. So just throw another name out there. That's a model we haven't hit yet. I graded every single one of these coaches 1 to 5. This is arbitrary. I tried to do the best I could. Quinn Snyder got a 4 for his run with the Utah Jazz. Taylor Jenkins got a 4, if not close to a 5, for what he's done with Memphis, to put it in perspective. Nick Nurse has gotten a 5 for what he did in Toronto. He won a championship. Frank Vogel, I think, got a 5 for his winning a championship in Atlanta. Terry Stotts got a 4 for his run in Portland. 50% of the coaches came out as a 1 or a 2. About 40% of the coaches, or about 30% of the coaches came out as a 3, and 30% of the coaches came out as a 4 or 5. So 30% of the coaching hires, 31 of 103, turned out to be a hit. A little higher, about 33%, 34%. Okay? And 50 of 103 turned out to be a 1 or a 2. And then 23% were right in the middle. So that's the methodology of what we did, or what I did. Me and the mouse in my pocket. So when we come next, of those 30%, those 4s and those 5s, who were the most of them, and at what percentage rate did they hit? Are you taking notes? I know. It's a little heavy, but it's unique to Locked On Jazz. It's what you expect, and it might give you a different insight on who you think the Utah Jazz head coach should be at the end of this process. There's a wild card out there also that needs to be talked about. And that's Jason Terry. His coaching candidacy has been dismissed, which to me, by most people, which to me is almost borderline offensive. Just want to throw it out there. I'm not sure why. 17-year NBA pro, assistant at Arizona, spent a year in the G League. Nobody's ever done this. This has never been done. Non-assistant NBA, went right away and got his head coaching experience. He's been in the league for 17 years. Frankly, former players with no head coaching experience actually do pretty well. Jason Kidd's been okay. Steve Nash is okay. Danny Ainge was pretty good. Like Doc Rivers in Orlando was okay his first time. It's been pretty good. That actually is former player just stepping in is not a bad hire in this league. And here you've got Jason Terry, who actually took the time to go to the G League to get his experience. Like, pretty interesting to me. Not anywhere on our charts, though. All right, we'll talk about that and continue. Today's show is brought to you by Intercap Lending. My good friend Steve Carter over at Intercap does amazing work. The reviews that come in time and time again with Steve just make my day because it means that a Locked On listener just had another amazing blowout, fabulous experience. Our COO of the company has used Intercap Lending. Intercap Lending is a Utah-based company that just continues to grow and expand because why? In lending, the way you grow and expand is you get deals done. And if you're Steve Carter, the way you get deals done is with this incredible attention to detail. He walks you through the process. You guys probably have a pretty good idea. You can see my messy office every day. You probably have a pretty good idea how my mind works and my interest in like collecting paperwork and all that kind of stuff. And Steve has gotten me the best deal twice and gotten me through the process both times. Give Steve a call at 385-800-8528, or if you can't remember Steve Carter's number, just email me first at dlock09@gmail.com and I'll set you up. It's Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. If you do call Steve at 385-800-8528, please make sure that you tell him you're Locked On so that you can get the Locked On corporate discount. That's Steve Carter. That's Intercap Lending. That's me making your day better. Today's show brought to you by Arcade1Up. This is so great. I'm going to tell you how you can win a Shaq NBA Jam coming up in just a few minutes. Today's show also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, you pick 2 to 5 players over under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on an entry, and it's just you versus a projected number. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's easy. Go check out the daily fantasy made easy with the award-winning app Prize Picks. You will love it. It's easy. It's fun. It doesn't have to be NBA. You can play any of the collegiate sports, NFL, Major League Baseball, soccer, MMA, or more. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive offer, no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. You get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA. That's right. This is exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today. Use the code NBA. Get 50% for free if a player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a point. Might as well do it for Game 6 because the season could be over. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. I mentioned it earlier. NBA Ultimate Mock Draft starts tomorrow, so go search it. We'll be on Locked On NBA feed, I believe, and maybe the NBA Big Board feed as well. So go grab it. It's a super show. I'm really excited to have it out. All right, let's do it. Here we go. This is what you're ready to hear. So 33% got 4 or 5s. 10 of them were former coaches. Not even former coaches that won. Just former coaches. That's about 30%. 10 of the 33, 30%. Of former coaches turned out to be a 4 or 5. Pretty interesting. Track record, not guaranteed. 8 former coaches with wins. So that they had Terry Stotts, Frank Vogel would fit into that for right now. That's also 33%. A little higher. 33%. Other coaches were 30. This is the interesting one. Assistant coaches with head coaching experience, non-player. These guys are hitting at a pretty good rate. So assistant coach, head coaching experience, non-player. Those coaches, 5 of them have been a 4 or 5. That's a 5 out of 9, or 5 out of 11. That is a 45% hit rate. And if you dig in a little bit more on this, and you get to the fact that it's a head coach, non-player who's been in the G League, it gets even better. So this takes us to Alex Jensen, and this takes us to Alex Jensen and Kevin Young. Here are some of those coaches. Brent Brown in Philadelphia was an assistant coach with head coach, was an assistant with head in Australia. I gave him a 3. Nick Nurse gets a 5. Jay Triano in Toronto was a head assistant with college head coaching. Gets a 1. Jim Boylan, longtime assistant head coach with college experience, gets a 1. So I'm saying that's a little bit of a miss. Tom Thibodeau was a longtime assistant for 26 years. And at the very beginning of it, he had coached at Salem State for a year, so he falls under this. And he got a 5 with the Bulls. You can decide whether you think that's valid or not, because he'd been a 26-year assistant by that point. But here are the others. Taylor Jenkins gets a 4. Assistant coach, head coaching experience in the G League. Dave Yeager, assistant coach, head coaching experience, no player. Gave him a 4. Chris Finch, longtime assistant head coach, in the G League. I gave him a 4. Probably deserves a 3. Minnesota, hard to tell. It's early. Quinn Snyder, assistant coach, head coach, both college and G League. G League trumps. Steve Clifford, longtime assistant with a head coaching in college. He got a 3. You go take just the G League coaches hired over the last 12 years in the league, and your hit rate is really high. Nick Nurse, Quinn Snyder, Chris Finch, Dave Yeager, Taylor Jenkins, Nate Bjorken misses. This is a pretty good argument to Alex Jensen or Kevin Young or Jason Terry with a head coaching experience, but no assistant. I don't know if that actually, on a former player, where that fits. But this one is Kevin Young, Alex Jensen's calling card right here. That of the 6 assistant coaches hired with G League head coaching experience since 2010, 5 of the 6 have been a really big success. Nick Nurse, Quinn Snyder, Chris Finch, Dave Yeager, Taylor Jenkins. Worth noting, all white male. Okay? I don't know if that's some bias we're suddenly coming up with that we shouldn't be, but that's worth noting. 3 assistant coaches with no head coaching and no player were 4 or 5s, and that's at 30%. So that's super interesting because that's the same exact rate as what we had for head coaches. In other words, those coaches that were assistants but no head coaching experience, no player, that's Johnnie Bryant, that's Sean Sweeney, that's Charles Lee, that's Lamar Skeeter, that's Will Hardy. I'm forgetting some people. Those coaches are hitting at 30%. We'll dig into them in a second. 2 GMs, former GMs, Popovich and Steve Kerr. And Pop was hired before 2010, but he's in there. And then this is interesting. Assistant coaches, no head coaching experience, former player. So that's Ime Udoka. Ime Udoka is just 2 of 13 have hit. So that's not a great model. The former player assistant, usually a longtime assistant, Larry Drew, Ty Corbin, those have not hit with any success rate at all. All right. The next thing we're going to do is go into each of these categories a little bit and look at who they are, what we should take from it, and what we learned. We just did that with the G League head coaches. because that's pretty darn interesting to break down. We'll now break down each of those a little bit more individually and see what we learn inside each category. But the early take here to me, who's in a front office somewhere we should go look at? I actually think there might be something to that. It's not a lot. It's a pretty small sample size. The assistant coach with head coaching experience looks really good. And former coaches look pretty good. Assistant coaches, no head coaching experience, no player, they hit at the same rate as former coaches. 30%. Not a huge difference here, but let's dig in a little bit. The one that does really click seems to be that G League coach. That seems to be something to it. And the one that doesn't click is the no head coaching experience former player. Chris Quinn to me is like really one of the candidates that jumps out of the chart to me. He fits into that. So that's a little interesting. All right, we'll continue. Look at those things. And let me tell you how you can win Arcade1Up. This is pretty cool. So Arcade1Up is the leader in home retro arcade games, bringing the best games ever back. They've made them bigger and better than ever with Shaq Edition. Boom shakalaka. That's right. NBA Jam is back. It's the Shaq Edition. Just jump clear across the court, set the ball on fire, do all the fun things. One of the first sports games ever to feature real digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. Complete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, plus making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from Arcade1. That's arcade1.com. Early September shipment date. Arcade1 is the place for fun. They also have Mortal Kombat, Golden Tee, many others starting at just $3.99. We're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to the Locked On listener. Enter for your chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win your NBA Jam Shaq edition. Don't miss out today. Enter today. Arcade1.com/lockedon. And then the real question is, are you letting me come over to play? Today's show is also brought to you by betonline.net, the number one place to get all your sports gaming information. Celtics are a 3.5 point favorite for game number 6 in Boston on Thursday. By the way, they've got everything up there from NBA player futures to basketball futures to Euro basketball. Let's see. On France, by the way, Serbia is the favorite at plus 275 for 2022 Euro basket. And then Rudy's playing, so France is number 2 at plus 450. They've also got all sorts of other fun ones. They had a Jazz coaching one for a while. NBA draft is up for a while. Where the Lakers are going to finish. There's every bet imaginable you could possibly get on the Lakers right now. They have the first pick of the draft. Jabari Smith is minus 175. Chet Holmgren is 115. And Paolo Banchero is plus 900. It's interesting, on the NBA Big Board show, Leif Tulane and Rafael Barlow, two of our experts, both had Paolo Banchero as number 1 on their big board. And Leaf actually has Jabari Smith down at like 4. Kind of interesting stuff. Go check it out for your second listen today. Locked On NBA Big Board. All right, here, let's break these down a little bit. So assistant coaches with no head coaching experience and non-players. So this has had some big success. But some of these head coaching experiences have been around for a long time. So Mike Budenholzer is the biggest success here. Frank Vogel has had success here, and Eric Spoelstra has had success here. Assistant coach, no head coaching, no player. That's the 3 out of 10 that have had head coach, have been successful, no head coaching, non-player. There have been 10 of them. That's a hard one to follow. This is the majority of our candidates at this point are non-head coaching, non-players. And they've got to conduct the room. The best being, as I said, those guys. Spoelstra got a 5. Vogel got a 4. Budenholzer probably in Atlanta. Budenholzer in Atlanta got a 4. Budenholzer in Milwaukee got a 5. Here are the failures on these. Lloyd Pierce, Kenny Atkinson in Brooklyn was not a great success. James Borrega, Ryan Saunders, Mike Malone in Sacramento, David Fizdale in Memphis, and Steven Silas in Houston. Those are pretty big misses. 7 of the 10 on no head coaching, no player. Johnnie Bryant, Lamar Skeeter, Sean Sweeney, Will Hardy, Charles Lee, who I'm hearing great things about, all come out on the 7 out of 70% of those hires have been a 1 or a 2 on my scale. We talked about assistant coaches with head coaching experience, non-player, right? Just a minute ago. That's Nick Nurse, Tom Thibodeau, Quinn Snyder, Chris Finch, Dave Yeager, Taylor Jenkins. The 2 fails were college. 5 of the 6 that played G League hit. Now let's go assistant, non-head coach, but a player. Okay, so this is an assistant coach, no head coach, but they played in the game. And so this gets us to this year. What's interesting is it feels really good because you're dealing with M.A. Udoka, and you're thinking that this probably should work. Now, what's also interesting about this is it seems to me there's a little difference as we dig into this of whether or not you are a longtime assistant or whether or not you're not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, I've got them all. All right, so the big hits are Ty Lue, was a assistant, former player, brief assistant, former player. We don't actually have this in our coaching search, by the way. Then there's really no other major hit here. Larry Drew in Atlanta was a longtime assistant, no head coaching experience. It was an 18-year assistant. He was okay. I gave him a 3. It probably could have been a 2. Jeff Hornacek in Phoenix, I gave him a 3. Might have been able to be a 2. Lionel Hollins in Memphis, I gave him a 3. Longtime assistant, no head coaching. He had been a brief head coach in Vancouver for a year, so that one's kind of a little funky. Monty Williams in New Orleans, no head coach, former player, 3. But there's a bunch of busts here. Jacques Vaughn, Brian Shaw, Chauncey Billups, Earl Watson, Luke Walton. So that one doesn't have the greatest success rate. Only 2 of the 12, M.A. Udoka and Ty Lue, have been hits on non-head coach, former player. But that's, interestingly enough, not on Danny Ainge's list at all. Former players, Steve Kerr, Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, Mark Jackson, Derek Fisher, and even if you back that one up, that one's had some success. And then former head coaches who've won before. What's interesting here is not a lot of these. This one's actually surprising me because my thought would be that these wouldn't bust. But a bunch of these actually do kind of bust. Avery Johnson with the Nets after winning in Dallas. Lionel Hollins with the Nets after winning. Now, maybe that's a comment on the Nets. Mike D'Antoni with the Knicks after winning in Stan Van Gundy with the Pistons after winning in Orlando. Scott Brooks in the Wizards. I gave him a 2, maybe a 3. Frank Vogel in Orlando. Mike D'Antoni with the Lakers. George Karl with the Kings. Doug Collins with the Sixers after winning earlier in his career. Those weren't great hires, and those are former head coaches that have won before. Now, on the flip side, Rick Carlisle wins a title. Mike D'Antoni pretty darn good in Houston. Frank Vogel wins a title in LA. Ty Lue's been pretty good for the Clippers. Doc Rivers been pretty good for the Clippers. Nate McMillan was good for the Pacers. Tom Thibodeau was good for the Knicks. But that's not outlandish. I mean, that's Terry Stotts, Frank Vogel. That's not knock your socks off in this process. It's good, right? Doc Rivers, 76ers is good. He comes in here twice. Mike Budenholzer, success in Atlanta, Milwaukee, 5. That knocks your socks off. But if you look at these, of the former coaches, 8 of them are 4 or 5s of the 23. That's a pretty good rate. 9 of them are 1s or 2s, though. So former head coaches who've won seem to have an equally good chance of hitting at a 4 or 5 or busting at a 1 or a 2. And then the wild one is that just former head coaches. They've had their head coaching experience, but they didn't wow you in any way, shape, or form. I just wrote them down as former head coaches. Dwayne Casey in Minnesota, Mike Woodson in Atlanta, Jeff Hornacek in Phoenix, Dave Fizdale in Memphis. You get the idea. Like, these are coaches that, they did their thing. This is the majority of 33 of them. Only 2 of those came out with 5s. Stan Van Gundy in Orlando after spending a year in Miami, and Doc Rivers with the Celtics after his run in Orlando. 6 of them came out as 4s. Dwayne Casey, Terry Stotts, Mike Malone in Denver, Nate McMillan in Portland, Jason Kidd, and Kevin McHale. So 8 of 33 just blasé former coaches have success. If you're following these numbers, this tells you that Terry Stotts and Frank Vogel, as former head coaches who've won, have a pretty good chance of having a pretty good run. 33% of them are a 4 or a 5. 33% of them are also kind of not great, but that's kind of the reality. And if you go back to our original numbers, remember 50% of all coaches got a 1 or a 2 in our numbers. So if it's only 33%, that's probably that's a pretty safe route. So Terry Stotts, now non-assistant coach, assistant coaches with no head coaching experience and a non-player, 70% of those were a 1 or a 2. That means the Charles Lee, the Will Hardy, the Sean Sweeney, the Johnnie Bryant, the Lamar Skeeter, pretty risky. And the numbers would tell you the least risky of all of these are assistant coaches who've had head coaching experience. Kevin Young with the Flash, Alex Jensen with the Canton Charge. And Jason Terry just should not be dismissed in this process. Now, I've probably missed somebody who's a candidate here. The one other candidate that I have not mentioned is the behind-the-bench Boston Celtics Joe Mazzulla. Joe Mazzulla is just 33 years old. He has been a head coach at Fairmont State and been an assistant for 2 years. Fairmont State is a Division II school. He would fit under the Jim Boylan, Tom Thibodeau, Jay Triano, assistant, not long time, college coach. And those have not been great. Otherwise, I think we've covered everyone. We've put them into their little boxes, and we'll see what impact it has in your mind on who the Utah Jazz should hire as their next head coach. Hope you enjoyed that exercise. Hopefully you think it's unique to Locked On. Hopefully it's value content. This is what we talk about all the time. And hopefully that's why you tune in every day. This is Locked On Jazz. Remember, Friday's show will be a Ask LOJ. So send me in any of your questions with a hashtag Ask LOJ. Have a great one. Thursday edition tomorrow. We'll continue to look at candidates and teams. It is Locked On Jazz. Have a great one. Talk to you soon. Thanks very much for tuning in. Now make Locked On NBA Big Board your second listen.